Saudi Arabia or the Gulf of Hormuz, whether it is healthcare or immigration or interest rates and the Fed. These things all, one way or another, intersect with and touch what the administration is doing, politics, and public policy. It is going to be a great conversation. Please welcome to the stage the Vice President, Mike Pence, and Joe Kernen. Joe Kernen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Vice President, thank you.
Thank you so much. Great to have you. This is great. It's good to see you again. It wasn't that long ago.
You too, Joe. Good
when
to see
I
you.
saw you. But to agree again to do this, I am very gratified. Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for being here. I really appreciate it. We'll kick it right off with, for lack of a better term, the economic state of the union. In your view, 2.5 years into the Trump presidency?
Well, the American economy is booming. It's absolutely undeniable. Since Election Day 2016, more than 6 million jobs created by businesses large and small. Unemployment is at a 50-year low. Wages are rising at their fastest pace in more than a decade. And, I mean, one fact after another. And as we travel around the country, the enthusiasm, the confidence, I think, a soaring stock market, improving the pension and retirement of working Americans. And it's just, it's all evidence of the success of the agenda that President Trump campaigned on, and working with our allies on Capitol Hill in our first 2 years, we were able to deliver on, to cut taxes, roll back regulation, unleash American energy, and fight to open markets and fight to create new, fair trading relationships with nations around the world. It's all been a part of the president's vision. We've been able to implement it, and America is prospering as a result.
We had a rate cut yesterday, another quarter point, the second one. The president, I think, was happy that it was cut a quarter point, but still unhappy with, reportedly, with Fed Chair Jay Powell. Is that fair to say that?
I think that's very fair to say that.
Is he still I also heard today that the Fed chairman's job is safe for now. Is that what you're led to believe? He's not looking for ways perhaps to replace Jay Powell at some point in the future?
Well, look, I think President Trump was expressing yesterday his frustration with what in our first 2 years in office was severe monetary tightening. I mean, during a time when the American economy is growing, in a time when there was very little evidence of inflation, we saw the Federal Reserve raise interest rates 7 different times. And while this second rate cut yesterday was welcome, and it may well be followed by another rate cut before the end of the year, I think the president's message to the Federal Reserve is that we ought to have a monetary policy in the United States that supports growth and also levels the playing field with our competitive partners. I mean, you essentially have zero interest rates in Europe today, and yet we're still recovering from 7 different rate increases in our first 2 years. And so the president wants to see more bold action. I mean, as you see the economy continuing to expand, as you see the fact that, once again, no evidence of inflation, and we are virtually at full employment in the country. This is a time that our monetary policy ought to be bold, it ought to be decisive, it ought to be making capital available, and that'll support even more economic growth. I mean, for all that we've done, more than 6 million new jobs, unemployment at a 50-year low, the lowest unemployment ever recorded for African Americans and Hispanic Americans. Unemployment rate for women is at a 65-year low. I mean, one statistic after another. That's honestly just what President Trump calls a good start. I mean, the economy's grown at 2.5% right now, which is significantly higher than the average for 8 years under the last administration. But the president really does believe that more regulatory relief, tax cuts 2.0, and the kind of monetary policy, the kind of trade deals, the kind of energy policies that we've begun to advance can take this economy to even all new heights for the American people.
The president even broached the possibility of zero rates here or even negative rates here. Do you think that would be a positive for the United States? Are you a proponent of the Fed going that far?
Well, I support the president in his call for monetary policy that levels the playing field for our economy with other economies around the world. I mean, it is remarkable to think about the growth in our economy. I mean, the global economy is slowing, there's no question, in certain quarters. And we went through a period high taxes, regulation. I mean, you've seen some of the popular protests in France have all been about high taxes that have been imposed. I mean, it's hard for me to.
But China,
hard for us to think
the president at some point says that yes, China is hurting. He knows he's hurting China. So then that's almost admitting that you're hurting global growth, or you're admitting.
But when it comes to China, it's a whole different ballgame. We're running $500 billion trade deficits with China, and we estimate that we lose almost as much in intellectual property theft every single year. I mean, what the president is doing with China is defending the American economy, defending America's interests, and the strong stand that he's taken, we believe is having an impact on China's economy. There's no question about it. And but that being said, discussions are ongoing. Deputies are in town, I'm told, next week. Principals will be meeting again. Secretary Mnuchin and the U.S. Trade Representative with Chinese officials next month, and we're talking. But the era of economic surrender is over, and for too long, one administration after another, Republican and Democrat administrations, were willing to accept extraordinary disadvantages to American workers and American jobs in the name of trade with China, and those days are over. I mean, and we're going to continue to stand strong. I mean, the president has a great relationship with President Xi. I've had discussions with President Xi where I've confirmed that. I've sensed that same rapport that they have. But the American people can be confident President Trump is going to continue to stand strong, not just to reset the trading relationship, to have China open their markets to the United States, but also to have China finally embrace the international rules of commerce to protect intellectual property and force technology transfer, all the things that have been working against America's interest and, frankly, the interest of economies around the world. But we remain hopeful, but
it's a lot of stuff.
The question now is whether or not that China wants to do a deal. I think we have a sense China wants to do a deal. We just don't know if they want to do it yet. So they'll be here. We'll be talking. We'll be exploring it. But I promise you, President Trump in our negotiations with China, with Japan, with the European Union, with the UK, once they complete Brexit, it's all going to put American jobs and American workers first.
What's the best we can hope for, though? You were tough in a speech. You said that China has an arsenal of policies inconsistent with free and fair trade. Tariffs, quotas, currency manipulation, forced tech transfer, IP theft, industrial subsidies handed out like candy. We're going to fix all this? Is it possible we get anywhere on all those things?
I've been in the Oval Office where the president has made it very, very clear to Chinese officials at the very highest level of these negotiations that the structural issues are central. Look, we supported China joining the World Trade Organization, and the belief was that by letting them into the World Trade Organization, that we would see China move away from these kind of economic practices, and frankly, we also hope that we would see them embrace more of the liberties that we cherish. That where you have a flourishing free enterprise economy around the world through the history of the world, invariably you see individual rights grow. And the truth of the matter is, China has not been willing to embrace the international rules of commerce. In fact, they've abused the rules of commerce to their advantage and taken advantage of America and other economies for far too long. And also the truth is, frankly, they've gone in many ways in the opposite direction on the issue of liberties.
Okay. USMCA
China and their conduct. And so the president's taken a strong stand. And honestly, Joe, it's quite in contrast with people that are seeking the Democrat nomination for president.
Yeah.
I heard where my predecessor, Joe Biden, did an interview where he scoffed at the idea that China was a competitor. And it's really remarkable.
Right.
But that's what got us where we are today with China. And President Trump sees clearly that China's been taking advantage of its position in the World Trade Organization for far too long. We're going to take a strong stand. And we're going to continue, I promise you, this president's going to continue to stand firm until either China decides to embrace the kind of reforms that will respect those international rules and reset our trading relationship, or, as the president said, we believe we're in a very strong position and we'll continue to use access to the most powerful economy in the world to protect American jobs and American workers.
USMCA, on track? Will the Dems give the president a win, or will they insist that enforceability's not where it needs to be, so they'll keep pushing it down the road? How do you handicap it by the end of the year?
The USMCA is not only the largest trade deal in American history, but if Congress passes it, puts it on the president's desk, it'll also be the most advanced trade deal in history. Not only will we bring together the United States and Mexico and Canada with reforms that we think will put American jobs first. We really do believe that through the negotiations that we ended kind of a maybe unintended incentive in NAFTA to move jobs south of the border. I saw the impact in my own home state of Indiana, where I saw entire communities shuttered. GM plants closed in Madison County, Indiana. I mean, we witnessed this in the Midwest. We think the changes in this that require a certain number of percentage of automotive parts be constructed at essentially what is the American wage ends that incentive to go south of the border. But there's something in this for everybody. I've had discussions with Speaker Pelosi. The president talked to Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer again this weekend on this subject, among others. We've continued to engage in good faith, and we're absolutely determined to move the USMCA through the Congress to the president's desk and complete it. But ultimately it comes down to a decision by Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and we're encouraged that she's been working closely with our U.S. Trade Representative. We've been working on that enabling legislation, and we're seeing more and more Democrats in the House of Representatives speaking out on this issue. But at the end of the day, we're just continuing to call on Speaker Nancy Pelosi, put the USMCA on the floor, because we really believe if Speaker Pelosi puts the USMCA on the floor of the House, it'll pass. We'll pass it in the Senate, and it'll be a huge win for the American economy and for American workers.
Vice President, Iran seems to be getting bolder, brasher as time goes by. The latest attack, Secretary Pompeo called it an act of war because it's an attack on the global economy. Do you agree with that? Or is there any in this country any inclination that we should have another military involvement somewhere, and in this case it would be for the Saudis, or is it going to be Saudis take care of it on their own terms and we'll support it, but we're probably, the American public probably loath to get into another conflict in the Middle East?
The attack on the Saudi Arabian oil facilities last Saturday was the largest attack on oil infrastructure in history. It was an act of war. And we do know from the Saudis in initial examination that the weapons were Iranian weapons. And we're engaged in organizing an international investigation to determine where those weapons were fired from.
Where they're fired from. So Iranian weapons, not at this point, not saying they were fired from.
Whether they came from the Houthis that the Iranians sponsor in Yemen, or they actually came from Iran is going to be a subject of careful investigation. The President has directed our national security team. I talked to the Secretary of State this morning on my way to New York. We'll be meeting, our national security team will be meeting tomorrow to continue to review the facts. And the President has basically said, let's get to the bottom of what happened. We've organized an international investigation into what happened. The President announced additional sanctions that we'll be imposing on Iran for whether it was their surrogates in Yemen who fired these missiles and drones, or whether they fired them themselves. We're imposing punishing new sanctions on Iran to hold them accountable. We'll be limiting the number of visas for Iranian officials that can come to the UN General Assembly. But the President will take all of this into account. He'll review the facts and he'll make a decision about next steps. But the American people can be confident that the United States of America is going to defend our interests in the region, and we're going to stand with our allies.
How do you see the Democratic field shaping up at this point? And who do you think the likely nominee is if you had to pick right now?
Well, I have to tell you, it's we're ready for any one of them. I mean, I don't know, there's like 20 or 30 of them still running right now.
Any predictions on the GOP ticket?
But I will tell you, yes. Yes. Yes.
I've heard the president say
Absolutely.
that. They still talk about whether you're going to be. I've heard the president say you are absolutely positively on the ticket.
Yes, I'm very honored by that. I was honored when he called me and asked me to run 2016. I'm honored
to
run again. But look, when we look at the other side, I got to tell you, it's not so much who, it's what they stand for. I mean, I never thought I'd live to see the day that one of the two major political parties in the United States of America would essentially be dominated by socialist thinkers.
Or democratic. They want you to say democratic socialist, but it's pretty. It's like sort of splitting hairs there.
Yeah, I hear the democratic socialists. They're Democrats who are socialists. I mean, I served in Congress with Bernie Sanders. He's a socialist, and he's proud of it. And I think whether whoever their nominee is, when you look at their policies like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, their plans to raise taxes, increase regulations, grow government, it would crush the economy that we just talked about at the beginning of this program.
It's growing. It's democratic socialism, and I wrote it carefully because I don't want to make anyone mad, but it is gaining with a large segment of the population. And I'm wondering whether that's reversible, and I'm wondering whether you think there's some inherent flaws in the way capitalism is operating in today's world that even has, for example, the Business Roundtable saying that there's more than just shareholders, there's stakeholders. Secretary Mnuchin, by the way, said he wouldn't have signed it. We have people come on in the morning, some would sign it, some wouldn't. Do we need a reset in the way, or a software upgrade in capitalism?
Well, no. We need to explain what free markets and free enterprise have done for the free world. I mean, it's not going to be enough for us just to win the next election. We've got to win the next generation. And to see whether it be the squad on Capitol Hill or whether it be leftist policies dominating the Democratic Party, we've just simply got to go out and talk about what free enterprise and free markets have meant, which is not only the most prosperous nation in the history of the world, the most generous nation in the history of the world, but also the cleanest environment in the history of the world, the highest labor standards in the history of the world. All of that's been driven by not only an economic system, but a nation that is grounded in freedom. And I have to tell you, as I travel around the country, I think the American people know this. I mean, they know it was freedom, not socialism, that created the most prosperous nation in the history of the world. It was freedom, not socialism, that ended slavery, won 2 world wars, and has made America a beacon of hope for all the world. I mean, when the president said in his State of the Union address, America will never be a socialist country, there was not only a roar of approval in the United States Congress, but around the country. As I've repeated that line, people invariably go to their feet. I mean, we look at places like Venezuela. We look at Cuba. We look at the former Soviet Union. We know what happens with socialist countries. You talk about slowdown. The social welfare states of Europe today are struggling under the weight of high taxes, high regulation, and socialist policies that have dominated Europe for far too long. You know, Margaret Thatcher probably said it best. She said, the problem with socialism is you eventually run out of other people's money. But the other side is actually campaigning on this bonanza of promises where everything's free. And I think that's why we have to answer that with a message about freedom and about what freedom has created and can create. But the great news about, you talk about criticisms of capitalism broadly. I mean, look at, you have a businessman turned president. He comes in, he puts into practice basically common sense principles to promote free enterprise and free market growth. And not only, as I said, 6 million new jobs, but look at what's happening with wages. In fact, I think it means maybe the most to the president and me that wages are not only rising at their fastest pace in 10 years, but they're actually rising most rapidly among blue-collar working Americans. I mean, it's really a remarkable thing. Ivanka Trump has headed up an effort with Secretary Ross, the administration now. We have 750 companies around the country that have committed 14 million apprenticeships and internships to train people in vocational skills and career and technical skills so that people can take advantage of the jobs and opportunities today. There are more job openings in America today than there are people looking for work. Capitalism is working. And you know, the left loves to talk about the income gap in America. I just heard the other day the income gap is actually closing because of the policies that President Trump has been advancing. And so that's a story we've got to tell, and we will tell that. I get very excited about getting out across this country in the next year and a half. Because back in 2016, we were just talking about what President Trump was going to do for America to make America great again. Now we can point to a track record, rebuilding our military, reviving our economy, more than 150 principled conservatives confirmed to our federal courts at every level, an energy renaissance, negotiating and opening markets to America around the world, negotiating new free and fair trade deals. That's a record of success I'm incredibly excited to carry to the American people, and that's a message about keeping America great.
It says 0 over there. No one said anything to me yet. I'm talking about the time. Got another couple minutes. I'll see whether it's okay. I think what's that? Okay. You are a budget hawk in Congress. Yeah. There are those that say the tax cut didn't work because it didn't generate the revenue. I disagree. The revenue has been flat. It's the spending that's been the issue.
Right.
So the spending would have to be cut, but a lot of that was military spending, which the president said he was going to do anyway. Where could the spending be cut to try to rein in the deficit? And are you at this point? I mean, when you see it at $1 trillion already, we're not even finished with the year. What would you propose, and are you bothered by that to the extent that you would have been when you were in Congress?
Well, I was, well, first let's remember the last administration doubled the national debt. The last administration came in and doubled the national debt at a time that they were also cutting military spending. When we took office, Joe, and I'm very proud to be the father of a United States Marine pilot. And very soon I'm going to be the father-in-law of a Navy pilot.
Really?
But when we took office, I'm told that the Air Force actually had a significant portion of their aircraft grounded to use these planes as spare parts to keep other planes in the air. That's how much the budget cuts in our military had impacted America's national defense. So the president came in and he said, we're going to do two things out of the gate. First, we're going to get the American economy growing again, because you know what? You're never going to cut your way back to a balanced budget. It's just not going to happen. I mean, the truth is, an economy that's growing at less than 2% is never going to generate the revenues to ever pay off the national debt, to ever balance the budget. So the president said one word: growth. So we worked on delivering on the president's promise to cut taxes for individuals and businesses, to roll back regulation at a record level, to unleash American energy. You know, this year we became, for the first time in 75 years, a net exporter of oil. I mean, we have an energy renaissance going on in America, but he puts all those things into effect. The economy has taken off, didn't grow by more than 2% on average for the last 8 years. We're 2.5 right now and rolling forward. But the other priority the president said is we've got to rebuild our military. I mean, this is a president that said we have to put our national defense first as a priority. But to do that involved negotiations given the filibuster rules in the Senate. We had to negotiate with Democrats to work to get a commensurate amount of domestic spending. But the president said we'll make the deal because we've got to fund our military. And we've made the largest investments in our national defense, largest increases in our national defense since the days of Ronald Reagan. And I'm incredibly proud of that. That's the first priority. So national defense and growth, and we think now that we're seeing to those things, and we're seeing that renewed American strength in our economy, in our national security, that lays a foundation for us to be able to deal with the long-term issues of debt and deficits.
They reset the clock, but I think it would be pushing it. It's running down. If I were to go to double overtime, I know I'd get in trouble. So I'm not going to, even though you're from Indiana, Hoosiers, but we're going to have to end it there. But I want to, once again, thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe.
Mr. Vice
Good to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. One thing very important right now, before anybody gets up, the Vice President needs to be securely out of the building and escorted out before anyone leaves. So please remain in your seats for